Just how good are the new M2 Macs going to be this year, and when will you be able to get your hands on one? It seems like we go through this endless cycle of waiting for Apple product upgrades every single year, and we need to decide on the right time to jump in on purchasing a new product, and nowhere is this cycle more unpredictable than with the Mac lineup. Unlike iPhones where Apple releases upgrades like clockwork, the Mac is subject to a lot of uncertainty and long gaps between upgrades because, believe it or not, the M1 Macs, although still an amazing value, are more than 1 year old now and actually outlasting the average release cycle of a usual product refresh, with the trusty Mac Rumors buying guide showing that Apple has not updated the M1 MacBook Air in 454 days. So this year seems like an absolute guarantee for new M2 Macs, and now we have a new newsletter out from Mark Gurman detailing what he thinks will be the 4 new M2 Macs slated for release in 2022. So what exactly will those M2 Macs be, and what sort of new features will they have? Well, I think the given at this point is a new version of the M2 MacBook Air, and to me, this is the most exciting and what will probably end up being the most radical Mac update out of all of the other Macs we can expect for this year. That's because the MacBook Air is rumored to be getting a new redesign that will be even thinner and lighter than the current M1 MacBook Air. Most rumors and concepts agree that it will be between the size and weight of a 12-inch MacBook and the current gen MacBook Air. Apple will be able to achieve this by making the bezel smaller around the entire MacBook Air, with some rumors even saying that Apple will use the same notch display design that they used on the MacBook Pro, but keeping the same 13-inch display size, making the overall volume of the product smaller to favor portability rather than a screen size increase. Furthermore, Apple is rumored to be getting rid of the tapered teardrop iconic MacBook Air shape and instead making it completely uniform in thinness. Now, while I expect the Air to be thinner, I don't expect it to be as thin as the 12-inch MacBook, because Apple discontinued the ultra-thin butterfly keyboard, and they will probably stick with the more reliable Magic Keyboard for this new MacBook, so they will need more thickness for the increased key travel. This Air is also likely to receive some rearrangement with the port selection, putting USB-C on both sides of the device rather than just having it on the left-hand side, and reintroducing the MagSafe charging port back to the MacBook Air line. Finally, the design of the Air is also rumored to be borrowing some inspiration from another Mac computer, the 24-inch iMac, and separating itself from the Pro-level MacBook Pros by being offered in a wider range of color options. Now, the interesting thing to me about this M2 MacBook Air is the display panel, which is rumored to be a mini LED display. That's the same display on the new MacBook Pro. So this Air is kind of rumored to be a more premium version of the existing MacBook Air, and as a result, it may actually see a price increase, with current predictions estimating that the increased costs could be closer to $1,200 for this ultra sleek portable MacBook Air. And of course, the M2 MacBook Air will have an M2 chip in it, right? These are all M2 Macs. It's going to be the headline feature of all these new computers, but another Mac that will be getting this new M2 chip is a new entry-level version of the MacBook Pro. Now, I know what you're thinking. Apple just released a new MacBook Pro, but this is kind of rumored to be a stripped-down version of that $2,000 very expensive MacBook Pro. So while it could keep the same design as the 14-inch model, it could feature things like one less Thunderbolt port, or possibly removal of some other port options, removal of the touch bar obviously, a less robust cooling system inside because it's going to have a more efficient M2 chip, so it's not going to draw as much energy and it's not going to make as much heat, and come in lower storage and memory tiers, which should reduce the cost of the M2 MacBook Pro. More recently, however, we have had some predictions from Mark Gurman in his newsletter, and he theorized that Apple could further reduce the cost of this laptop by using an LCD display instead of the mini LED display that the MacBook Pros have, and by not offering the adaptive 120 Hz ProMotion refresh rate. Now, honestly, this is where I'm going to go against Gurman here, and that's not something I usually do, because Gurman is usually pretty accurate. But the thing to note here is that this is a newsletter, kind of with him speculating on what he thinks the MacBook Pro would feature, and not an official rumor report that would be published in something like Bloomberg. So he's kind of just theorizing how the MacBook Pro could achieve a lower price point here. And while an LCD display would definitely help bring costs down, it seems to conflict with existing and reputable reports that the MacBook Air we just talked about, the M2 MacBook Air, would be getting a mini LED display panel. While I could see Apple limiting the refresh rate down to 60 Hz to make a good product distinction and also reduce costs, it just doesn't make sense to me that this future M2 MacBook Air would have a mini LED display, but then the Pro level MacBook Pro would come with a worse quality LCD display. I think that would just be such a confusing lineup, so put me on the record as saying that any future M2 MacBook Pro would still come with a mini LED display. I think that's probably likely to happen. I would estimate the price of this MacBook Pro would be around $1,300 to $1,400 based on these reports, and I think it could be a very, very popular MacBook option if Apple does keep a very similar port selection to the new 14-inch MacBook Pro, and I think that's one of the reasons why you'd want to choose the M2 MacBook Pro over that rumored M2 MacBook Air. All right, and probably the least substantial update to the 2022 Mac lineup might be the best option because it is the reigning champ of the best valued Mac, and that of course is the Mac Mini. Now this M2 Mac Mini really doesn't have many reports or rumors surrounding it, but realistically, what can you expect for this device? It's going to be a Mac Mini enclosure, probably the same one as the M1 Mac Mini with an M2 chip inside of it, and it will probably stay at the same price point, $699, and will probably have the same port selection as the current model. And maybe the only notable upgrade for this machine might just be the more powerful M2 chip. Now, the M2 chip itself will be the true next generation Apple Silicon chip, so it will feature faster clock cores for higher single core performance, which means also higher multi-core performance, although probably not as performant as the multi-core performance in the M1 Pro or MACS chips, because the M2 chip is still rumored to still use 4 high-performance cores and 4 energy-efficient cores. And if you know your chip differences, you know that the M1 Pro and M1 Max come with 8 high-performance CPU cores. So that M2 chip is obviously going to be on all of the M2 Macs that we talk about in this video, and while there may be redesigns for something like the M2 MacBook Air, the M2 chip itself will be the most substantial upgrade or feature for most of these Macs. Finally, another Mac we are just hearing about for the first time in this newsletter is the latest M1 Mac to receive a refresh, and that is the 24-inch iMac. Now again, there's not too many rumors surrounding a refresh to this device, other than that Apple is working on an update that could be announced this year. And like the Mac Mini, I think the biggest feature we can probably expect for the M1 iMac is just a spec bump with the M2 chip. And considering this 24-inch iMac just received a redesign last April, there's pretty much zero chance we will be getting a new design this year. Although we shouldn't expect a redesign, we could expect perhaps a refresh in color options. You know, new color options could be sold alongside of this iMac, or it could feature a whole new range of colors. Apple likes to do that when there isn't a design update. And we may see some other options or upgrades. So maybe increased storage options or memory options or an increase in the base storage, things like that, but very, very little updates. But maybe, according to Gurman, there may be the possibility that this year's M2 iMac might, and I say might, receive the Face ID sensor, as apparently Apple was already working on shipping Face ID on the original 24-inch M1 iMac, and the iMac is already thick enough to fit the existing Face ID sensors that are on the iPhone and the iPad, whereas on the MacBook display lid, that actually still might be too thin to fit those advanced sensors. So it's possible, while we did get Touch ID on the keyboard for the 24-inch iMac just last year for the first time, that this year we could finally see the first Mac to actually ship with Face ID, and it wouldn't be a laptop. It might actually go in the desktop first. All right, so 4 new M2 Macs slated to be released this year. Now, when can you expect them? Well, while it may seem like Apple is ready to hit us with all of these new M2 Macs at any second based on how long it's been since we've had a refresh, and with a March 8th spring event rumored, you may think that these Macs are about to show up very, very soon. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but right now there is no concrete rumors or sources saying that we will get these new M2 Macs at a spring event or anytime soon, and the actual release date may be very late into 2022. With my estimations that we will probably see these around the fall, sometime released in October or November, and that's because Apple is still laser focused on completing the Mac transition to Apple Silicon. This is their last year to do it, and they still need to release 3 more M1 Macs before they are finished with this transition, with the rumored M1 iMac Pro, the M1 Pro Mac Mini, and of course the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, which could feature a quad M1 MACS chip with up to 40 CPU cores and up to 128 GPU cores. So while we should expect a lot of Mac updates for this year, it's going to be a super exciting year for the Mac. If you are patiently waiting for these M2 Macs, unfortunately, I'm guessing you still have a lot of time to wait before we actually get these refreshes rolled out. All right, but so far, that's pretty much everything we know about the M2 Mac lineup for 2022. Please let me know what you think of this lineup in the comments below, and are you excited to buy one? Also, if you like this video, be sure to give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.